On a bitterly cold winter night, I found myself driving home after a lengthy journey. Dark, ominous clouds loomed overhead as snowflakes began to gently fall, gradually building up into a dense, blinding blanket, shrouding everything around me in stark white. It seemed the blizzard was heralding a restless night. As I navigated through a sparse forest, where bare branches scattered randomly across the desolate road, my car's headlights struggled to penetrate the thick curtain of falling snow, only managing to illuminate the swirling snowflakes hurtling towards the windshield. Suddenly, my vehicle began to shake violently, skidding across the icy road until it finally came to a halt, unable to move any further. After a few futile honks, I decided to turn off the engine and see if I could somehow free myself from this predicament. Wrapping my scarf tightly around my neck and pulling my hat down over my ears, I stepped out into the snowy wilderness. A chilling north wind blew, causing me to shiver uncontrollably. Holding a dimly lit flashlight, I started to cautiously make my way along a shadowy path through the trees. The light revealed a dark figure lurking behind a large tree, prompting me to focus intently, trying to discern who or what it could be. My mind raced with haunting tales of lost souls who had wandered these woods on such nights. As I approached, the snowy veil slowly lifted to unveil a horrifying scene I would never forget. Under the eerie glow of the moon, patches of snow slowly melted away to reveal a woman lying motionless by the roadside. Her body was frozen solid, covered in snow, with dry leaves and broken branches scattered around her tragic figure. The cold moonlight reflected off her pallid skin. Upon closer inspection, a more gruesome detail emerged, sending a chill down my spine. A large, grotesque incision marred her abdomen, with remnants of clotted blood staining the surrounding pristine snow. Next to her, a small child, also completely frozen, was abandoned in a curled position, its tiny hands reaching out as if in search of the warmth its mother could no longer provide. The pain was unimaginable. The woman's abdomen had been crudely opened with indeterminate tools, leaving behind not just brutal, but clumsily inflicted cuts that spoke of an unspeakable murder. Fragments of her torn shirt scattered around the scene, revealing her icy skin beneath layers of snow. Without hesitation, I spun around back to my car and grabbed my cell phone with the intent to call the police. However, cell reception in this dense forest was virtually non-existent. Desperation overwhelmed me as I realized I was trapped in an extremely dangerous situation, alone amidst a heavy snowstorm, unable to contact anyone. All around me were darkness, the howling wind, and the haunting image of the unfortunate woman that lingered in my mind. With few options left, I decided I had to make it back to town by any means necessary. I started walking, using my phone's flashlight to guide my path, trying to shield my eyes from the falling snow. The snow grew thicker, each step sinking deep, the cold biting into my flesh. Every move was exhausting, but fear and urgency drove me to not stop. After nearly an hour of struggling against the harsh weather and continuous panic, faint lights from houses at the town's edge began to appear. I was nearly spent, but those lights were like a beacon in the darkness, urging me to keep moving. At last, I reached a gas station where I could seek shelter and call the police. The attendant was both shocked and concerned to see me in such a state. They quickly helped me contact the police and provided a place for me to warm up and recover. When the police arrived, I recounted everything that had happened from my car, getting stuck to the horrific scene I had stumbled upon. They immediately coordinated with search and rescue teams to return to the scene. Although I was safe now, I couldn't erase the image of that woman from my mind. That night, I couldn't sleep, haunted by thoughts of what might have happened if I hadn't left there in time. Long after, the murder remained unsolved. As for me, I never traveled down that road again after that night. In the winter of 2013 or 2014, during a fierce blizzard in our small town, my friend Carlos and I decided to shovel sidewalks for some extra cash. The snow fell thick and fast, blanketing everything in a silent, eerie white. With schools closed and the night still young, we set out at 8 p.m., our shovels slung over our shoulders, optimistic despite the howling wind and biting cold. Our first few attempts at soliciting work were met with firm rejections. The streets were desolate, the night unnaturally quiet except for the whistle of the wind. It was nearly an hour before we secured our first job, and another while before the second. Our spirits, dampened by the cold and scanty earnings, were just about to give in when we approached a small, isolated corner house. The promise of better pay from corner lots kept our hopes flickering. I rang the bell, and the door creaked open just a fraction. A deep, gravelly voice from the darkness within asked, "Who's there?" After a brief explanation and negotiation, we agreed on $40. The door shut without a glimpse of the man behind it. "That was weird," I muttered to Carlos, but we shrugged it off and started shoveling. As I cleared the driveway, an uneasy feeling crept over me. Every so often, I glanced towards the house. At one point, my eyes caught movement at a window, a shadowy figure watching me. The face was obscured, hidden in darkness, which sent a shiver down my spine. Despite my unease, we continued, finishing our task in silence. As we walked to the front to collect our payment, the door suddenly flung open, and the man's voice barked, "Go around to the back." Startled, we complied, trudging through the thick snow to the backyard, which was dimly lit by a single bulb under a small awning. We waited by the back door, the minutes stretching out. Impatient and chilled to the bone, I knocked loudly. A window above us creaked open, and the man instructed, "Come inside." Reluctantly, we entered through the back door into near total darkness. The interior was cold, the air stale. "Hello," I called out tentatively. "I'm counting your money on the table," the man's voice echoed from the kitchen. As we approached the doorway, a sliver of light from a street lamp outside filtered through the window, casting eerie shadows. I reached the kitchen door, about to peer through the crack, when I realized the crack was blocked by an eye staring right back at me. I recoiled, grabbing Carlos and muttering about a forgotten item outside. We hurried out, not stopping until we were safe in my backyard. As we stashed our shovels and headed inside, Carlos paused, his face pale. "Look," he whispered, pointing at fresh boot prints in the snow, leading from the gate to my back door and then to the shed. Heart pounding, we rushed to tell my mom. The neighborhood wasn't the safest, and she didn't hesitate to call 911. Police arrived quickly despite the snow. From the back window, we watched as officers dragged a man from our shed. He was wearing the same clothes as the man from the corner house, the supposed homeowner. He confessed to the police that he had planned to break into our house once we were asleep. Why he wanted to, or what he had intended to do, remained chillingly unclear, especially considering his intoxicated state. This night left us with haunting questions. What would have happened if we had stayed in that kitchen? What dark intentions had lurked behind his watchful eyes? The mystery of his motives hung over us, as heavy as the winter air, long after the snow had melted. When I was 17, alone at home on a cold December night, I decided to try marijuana for the first time. What I didn't know was that it would lead to the most terrifying ordeal of my life. As a blizzard howled outside, I sat in my room, a forgotten movie flickering on the screen. Mrs. Doubtfire, if memory serves, while I fumbled with the pipe, learning how to inhale without coughing. It was almost an hour before I felt anything, a strange new sensation that made the room seem unnervingly calm. My senses sharpened, or perhaps dulled. It was hard to tell. Suddenly, a faint tapping pulled me from my haze. It sounded like it was coming from downstairs. Muting the TV, I listened. The noise was a soft but persistent knocking at the front door. Anxiety gripped me. Were my parents home early? Could they smell the smoke? Tiptoeing downstairs, I peered through the peephole. Instead of family, a gaunt, nearly homeless-looking man stared back at me with hollow eyes. Living in a sparse suburban area where the next house was a good 200 yards away, this was highly unusual, especially on such a stormy night. I decided not to answer, retreating to my room and locking the door behind me. The knocks grew louder. As I returned to my pipe, the effects began to deepen, enveloping me in a foggy trance. My thoughts wandered until a loud thud against my window snapped me back to reality. I dove to turn off the TV, plunging the room into darkness. My heart pounded in my ears. He's just outside, I thought, but what can he do? In the pitch black, every creak and whisper of wind seemed amplified, feeding my paranoia. I assured myself I was safe inside. That reassurance lasted until I drifted off, only to be jolted awake less than an hour later by a shuffling noise from the den below. My mind raced as I sat up. Then, through the darkness, I noticed the door was slightly ajar. A shadow moved. A figure was watching me from behind the door. I screamed, a visceral, soul-tearing scream, as the figure stepped into the moonlight, filtering through the window. "I just need a warm place," he whispered eerily, approaching my bed. Adrenaline took over. I shoved the intruder to the floor. He was frail, lighter than I expected. Dragging him across the floor, I pushed him out and slammed the door. He resisted weakly, eyes wild with desperation and madness. I locked the door and called the police, my hands trembling. I watched him from the window, where he had broken the glass to enter. He sat huddled in the bushes, a pitiful and eerie sight. When the police arrived, they found him still there, curled up, and took him away. Reflecting on that night, I feel a pang of guilt. He was clearly disturbed, possibly not dangerous, but the fear was real, and it haunted me. It was, without a doubt, the most frightening night of my life. It was the winter of 2014, a pivotal time as my father had secured a new job that necessitated a significant move, 9 hours away from the only home I had known. To facilitate our transition, we hired a moving truck for our belongings, but the responsibility of driving our car to our new home fell to me, a new driver, under the guise of gaining valuable experience. Given the season, my apprehension wasn't just about the long drive, but the impending blizzard that my phone ominously predicted would hit mid-journey. Despite my fears, my father reassured me, brushing off the severity of a winter storm as no different from regular driving. We embarked on our journey at 3 p.m., expecting to arrive at our new home by midnight. However, as darkness fell around 8 p.m., so did the blizzard, more fierce and unforgiving than I had ever imagined. Throughout, my father's trust in my nascent driving skills was unnerving, as he remained silent, never once suggesting he take over. My worst fears materialized when I lost control of the car. The vehicle skidded off the highway, heading straight for a dense line of trees bordering the road. In a desperate attempt, I managed to swerve slightly, narrowly avoiding a direct collision, but still grazing a tree. Surprisingly, my father was not angered. Rather, he seemed relieved that the incident hadn't been worse. We exited the car to assess the damage. Miraculously, just a slight scratch on the back passenger side door. Our breaths visible in the freezing air, we were about to return to the car when the beams of high-powered headlights caught our attention. A vehicle approached, honking persistently until it pulled up beside us. The driver rolled down his window, initiating what was an unnervingly casual conversation, blatantly ignoring our predicament. My father, puzzled, cut through the small talk, pressing the man for his actual intent. The stranger claimed that we had dropped something about a mile back that had supposedly fallen into our trunk. Doubtful, I exchanged a look with my father, who was clearly thinking the same, that nothing could have possibly fallen out. As the man insisted, claiming he had the item in his back seat, curiosity got the better of me, and I moved to retrieve it. Just as I touched the handle of his car's backseat door, my father's voice shattered the night, commanding me to stop and return to our car. His tone was urgent, uncharacteristic. The moment hung, suspended in the cold night air, before I heeded his call, stepping away from the stranger's vehicle. We drove off in a thick silence, the man's face hauntingly stern as we passed. Miles down the road, my father apologized for yelling at me, his voice heavy with worry. He confessed that through the car window of the stranger, he had glimpsed two men standing behind the door, seemingly preparing for my approach. He believed that opening that door could have led to my being attacked, kidnapped, or worse. Hearing this was a real shock to me, but to this day, I remain grateful that my father shared what he had seen. It taught me from a young age that not everyone in this world harbors good intentions. Though we could never confirm 100% that those men had ill intentions, I truly trust my father's instincts. The whole situation just didn't add up. Why would two men be waiting right behind the door for me to open it? Moreover, when we arrived at our new home, we confirmed that nothing was missing from the trunk of our car. Just revisiting this whole experience still sends chills down my spine, even today. One frigid January night, when the world outside was swallowed by a ferocious blizzard, my friends and I, 6 in total, decided to brave the storm and continue our cherished tradition of playing manhunt in the snow. The game was a thrilling blend of tag and hide and seek, made even more exhilarating by the blanket of snow that muffled our footsteps and transformed familiar yards into alien landscapes. Our safe point was the front stoop, and with the snow serving both as a concealer and an obstacle, the hunt for footprints and the hurling of snowballs felt like a battle in a wintry war zone. On that particular night, the atmosphere was charged with an electric thrill that only a storm can bring. My teammates, Dan and Christian, and I were the ones hiding. Dan, the adventurous one, vaulted over a fence into a backyard on the next block, while Christian climbed onto my neighbor's shed, disappearing behind its sloped roof. I decided on a more cunning strategy, running around the backyard to create a confusing maze of footprints. As the seekers began their hunt, announcing their start from the other side of the house, adrenaline surged through my veins. In a quick decision that I would soon regret, I signaled Christian to make a run for it if necessary, and dove into a thick bush, flattening myself in the snow. Moments later, the backyard was alive with the sounds of our friends following the chaotic trail I had left. They were getting dangerously close to my hiding spot. Suddenly, Christian leapt from the shed into the snow and sprinted toward the front yard, drawing the chasers after him. Seizing the moment, I scrambled out of the bush to find a better hiding spot. Mimicking Dan's earlier escape, I clambered onto the shed roof and then over the fence into the adjacent yard. It was there that the night took a sinister turn. I expected to find Dan, or at least his footprints, but instead I stumbled upon a set of boot marks near the fence where he must have landed. The tracks quickly morphed into something more horrifying, a steady trail of marks that suggested something or someone had been dragged through the snow. My heart pounded as I followed the ominous path to the back door of a pitch-black house where the trail abruptly ended. Panic set in. The realization hit me like a wave. Dan was in trouble. I spun around to escape, but as I made my way back across the yard, the sliding door of the house creaked open. A figure, cloaked in a black coat with a hood shadowing its face, emerged and began to advance towards me with heavy, determined steps. Terror overtook me, and I screamed, scrambling over the fence just as the figure reached out in a vain attempt to grab my legs. My friends, alerted by my screams, rushed to my side as we hurried back to the safety of my friend's house. I recounted the horrifying events to my friend's parents, who immediately called the police. The father, armed and determined, stormed to the house where I had seen the figure. The door was eerily unlocked. He cautiously entered, and after agonizing minutes emerged carrying Dan, who was unconscious and visibly injured, his face bruised as if struck by something blunt. Perhaps a shovel. The driveway was empty, indicating that the assailant had fled upon my escape. That mysterious man never returned to his house, and to this day he remains a wanted person by the police. That harrowing night taught us a chilling lesson. Danger can lurk even in familiar places, and sometimes the predator might be just next door, hidden behind the facade of normalcy, waiting for an opportunity to strike.